represent California's 36th district, and we're here to talk about the release of the GAO study in regards to the federal government's practice of or lack of meaningful consultation with tribes as determined by our statutes and our Constitution. Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Chairman Grijalva, will be speaking after I do. Also, Chairperson Payment and members of will also be speaking, who's Vice President of the National Congress of American Indians. I want to thank them for joining. And we also have other tribal leaders here behind me, and I apologize if I miss some of them, but I have a list here. Chief Beverly Cook, St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. Chief Eric Thompson, St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. Thora Padilla, Mescalero Apache Tribe. And Darren Modzelewski from the National Congress on American Indians. So thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to be joined by tribal leaders and advocates to discuss the importance of our government honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations. Time and time again, we have heard from tribal members that our federal government is failing to fulfill its responsibility to meaningfully consult with tribes about infrastructure projects that directly impact them. This isn't just a moral failure, it's a violation. It's a violation of an executive order and a violation of Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution, establishing the sovereignty of tribes and nation-to-nation relationships. Even more troubling, decisions are being made that affect the health, livelihood, sacred lands of tribal members without their input. That's why 2 years ago, Chairman Grijalva and I called for the Government Accountability Office to do a comprehensive study on federal agencies' consultation of tribes on federal infrastructure projects. That report is here. Over the past 2 years, the GAO received comments from 100 tribes from across the country. They interviewed officials from 57 tribes and 21 federal agencies, in addition to conducting in-person visits to field offices and project sites. The report findings are appalling. It found that our government is failing tribes by consistently failing to meaningfully consult them on the projects that directly impact their lives. Take the Dakota Access Pipeline, for example. This environmental and health hazard passes within a half mile of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's reservation. The pipeline endangers the health and land of tribal members, threatening their water supply and sacred sites, risking a disastrous poisoning of their ancestral homeland. I visited the project site myself. I heard the voices of Standing Rock Sioux members. I heard their outrage with this threat to their drinking water, their land, and their way of life. Thanks to the bravery and unyielding advocacy of countless tribal advocates, the Obama administration had the sense to put the project on hold until further full environmental studies were done and further consultation was done with tribes throughout the region. President Trump, however, immediately gave the project the green light without bothering to fulfill the full environmental impact studies or to consult tribes further. The reality this report exposes is that a lack of meaningful consultation is much larger than just the Dakota Access Pipeline. Federal agencies consistently have not met their obligation to consult the very people affected by the projects they are working on. Tribes have the right to self-determination and the right to have a say in decisions that impact their health, sacred lands, and cultural preservation. The need for meaningful consultation is specifically laid out by Executive Order 13175, which requires agencies to engage in, quote, an accountable process to ensure meaningful and timely input by tribal officials in the development of regulatory policies that have tribal implications. After all, isn't that the idea of democracy? That an individual has a say in the decisions that impact their lives? It is clear from this report that in many cases, consultation was neither meaningful nor timely, and that agencies are often in no way accountable for their decisions. Most concerning to me is that more than 60 of these tribes felt that government agencies were only conducting consultations to check a box and didn't adequately consider or act on tribal concerns. Their concerns were well-founded. Of the 21 agencies reviewed, the GAO found that 15 do not have an adequate policy to communicate with tribes about how their input was considered during the decision-making process. The report found a host of other issues as well. In some cases, agencies failed to consult tribes until after projects had begun, threatening tribes and the fundamental principles of our democracy. Because like I said earlier, the whole sense of a democracy is that an individual should have a say in the decisions that affect their life, their health, and of course, their survival. That's democracy. In other cases, agencies disrespected the government-to-government sovereignty, nation-to-nation responsibility by sending low-level staffers to conduct consultation or by delegating that responsibility to the project applicants. This abdication of responsibility is plain wrong. It is also clear that more must be done to educate our government agents in the importance of tribal consultation. Nearly 50% of tribes and 43% of agencies reported that knowledge and training was deficient for federal workers. Tribal history and customs, locations of ancestral lands, and treaty rights are essential to a tribe's identity, and it is critical that federal agencies understand that context when undertaking potentially disruptive projects. And yet we are seeing the same failures resurface again and again and again. So, what will make the difference? I am optimistic about the future because with this report, we are armed with hard evidence that our government can and must do better. We are armed with 22 recommendations that direct federal agencies to listen to tribes and to ensure their voices meaningfully shape infrastructure projects. In addition to passing Chairman Grijalva's RESPECT Act, which will codify the executive order requiring federal consultation of tribes, our federal government needs to act on these recommendations by creating a tribal information database for agencies to reference during consultation, hiring tribal consultants to ensure the government is aware of tribal customs and needs, establishing a single standard to guide the Army Corps of Engineers' consultation of tribes. These recommendations will help us reverse course on our government's systematic disregard of tribal voices and finally move toward a more inclusive, humane, and just government. Together, we can build a government that respects the right of our tribes to have a say in the projects that affect their health, culture, their survival, their cultural perseverance, and their economy. Together, we can elevate the respect from nation to nation and the sovereignty given by our Constitution to tribal nations within our land. And with that, I would like to introduce my friend, Chairman Grijalva, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank all the people that came out to join us today, tribal leaders, my good friend, Congressman Ruiz, who had the foresight in requesting this GAO report, and it's a historic release. Historic in the sense that it validates and verifies what we have been hearing from Indian country for a long, long time. That the consultation process, rooted in the trust responsibility, and in not only the acceptance, but the recognition of the sovereign status of tribes in this country, is being applied inconsistently, subjectively, and in many cases on a whim. Putting up a note at a community center is not consultation for tribes. Avoiding discussions till after decisions are made is not consultation. What is consultation is a sense of respect and equality that's extended and protected not only by our Constitution, but by the trust responsibility that every one of us in Congress has a share in and has a responsibility to uphold. And with that in mind, the subcommittee on Indigenous People of the United States from the Research Committee held a hearing on a draft piece of legislation that I have introduced, the Respect Act. And as Congressman Ruiz said, it codifies into law the consultation process, and after reading some of the key recommendations, so 22 recommendations in the report, it clearly is time for the Respect Act to move forward. Not only were the inconsistencies there, but we feel that this piece of legislation gives definition to the concept of meaningful consultation, and meaningful consultation giving tribes not a seat at the table, but also an avenue for redress. That if those issues that are codified in the Respect Law are not followed by an agency or an extension of the federal government, then not notifying tribes of their decisions, that there's a redress to go directly to court and to satisfy what this law needs to mandate and will mandate. The history of some of our federal agencies engaging in meaningful consultation is not positively reflected in the report. As Mr. Ruiz said, tribal input and consultation with federal agencies should be the norm, not the goal. And too many times, tribes are left in the dark when it comes to federal projects that impact tribal lands or their people. This is not okay. And I think the federal government needs to uphold its trust responsibility and provide meaningful consultation with tribes. The Respect Law begins to define what meaningful consultation is in a very direct, mandated way. We hope to move that legislation soon. Hopefully by the end of June is the goal. And I applaud the efforts of congressional members, tribal leaders that have pushed the request for this report. And I hope that this report and the legislation that I just spoke about will be a step in the right direction to ensure that tribes are no longer left out of important decisions that could drastically affect their well-being. And it's also, as the Act says, about respect, about following the rule of law, about insisting that the First Peoples not be left at the doorstep when the federal government makes decisions. They're impactful, and I think it also recognizes the importance of the presence of indigenous people in this country and their place, not only in the history, but in the daily life of people. Equity, respect, and with that will come a law that will mandate that we follow meaningful consultation and do it in such a way that extends respect and provides, through redress, accountability. I want to thank everybody for their advocacy and turn that back over to my good friend, Congressman Ruiz.
Now I'd like to introduce Chairperson Dr. Aaron Payment of the Salt Tribe of Chippewa Indians, First Vice President of the National Congress of American Indians.
Ani Bushu. I first want to start out by giving you a little history lesson, just a little small one. Prior to the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution being passed, the relations and government-to-government relations with American Indian tribes existed before that. And it was embodied in the Northwest Ordinance, which was written by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, our first Secretary of State. So when you think about that relationship, it's really akin to foreign nations in that relationship, and Henry Knox, who was the Secretary of War. And the Northwest Ordinance prescribes what that relationship is supposed to look like in a government-to-government and respectful way, recognizing that Native people had an inherent right to the land and that we had a say-so in the matter. That was then codified in the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which defines the authority of Congress to regulate commerce among the foreign nations, the several states, and Indian tribes. So Indian tribes are no less sovereign than states and akin to the relationship of foreign nations. And so I appreciate our good friends from Indian country, from Congress, who are upholding that section in the Constitution and recognize the importance of that government-to-government relations. I'm especially grateful for the drafting of the RESPECT Act that will codify that relationship. So we also have the executive order 13175 that was first entered by President Clinton, but it also transcends politics, it transcends administrations, and certainly the government-to-government relations predates partisanship. And so presidents, there's ebbs and flows in administrations with adherence, and what the report shows is there's a great variance depending on the agency and whether or not they are actually doing consultation, and if they are, that they're not just sitting and listening and nodding their head and then they've checked the box and they don't have any duty or responsibility afterwards. So I appreciate codifying the RESPECT Act, and including in this government-to-government relation consultation should include a protocol for how you go about approaching a tribe and talking to a tribe and getting the respective input, and then how that input is actually substantively incorporated within the decision. So the pre-informed consent and not making the decision after the fact. So under the Obama administration, and again I said this transcends presidents, but under the Obama administration, NCAI hosted a number of consultation sessions with a number of federal agencies that listened to us, and what we came up with was recognition of tribal sovereignty, respect for on-reservation and off-reservation treaty rights, compliance with the federal trust responsibility, including seeking tribal informed consent and protecting trust resources, upholding all statutory obligations, and ensuring tribal environmental justice. One last prevailing theme across all of that was protecting our sacred sites. So certainly any infrastructural projects need to have consultation with tribes so that we can protect our sacred sites, our ancestors. We have a great respect for that. You don't see enough of that in society today, but that's at the core of our traditional Native values, is to protect our sacred sites. So with that, I do want to invite a couple of tribal leaders up so that you can hear from a cross-section across the nation. Again, I'm Chairperson of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians and First Vice President for the National Congress of American Indians.
I wasn't supposed to be saying anything today, and everyone who's spoken already has really said really powerful words to describe what should be happening moving forward after this report. And I wanted to extend our gratitude from the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, Chief Connors and Chief Thompson and myself, Chief Cook, to Congressman Ruiz and Grijalva. I know he had to leave, but I can't tell you how important it is to be able to sit in front of someone who will listen to you and hear you, not just, as Aaron said, nod their head and doodle on their pad while you're speaking to them, but to really understand and feel in their heart what it is that we're trying to convey to them. So this is outstanding for us to be able to put our hands on a report that contains our story from Akwesasne, from the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, and how we've been impacted by it. And would we like something to be done? Yes. This is the first step, though, because teaching people how to listen apparently is going to be the crux of the matter from this GAO report. So what comes naturally to some doesn't come naturally to everyone, especially federal programs. We wanted to say that the health of the land and the health of the environment determines the health of the people, and you can't ignore that. You can't run from it. It's the way that it is. It's nature's law. So hopefully in our own instance, and I know in others who are fighting to protect the waters and protect the land, to protect the air, it's similar from the West Coast, north and south, and all the way to the east. So we're fighting not just to be heard, but for action to be taken. because all of our lives and our grandchildren that are coming towards us that haven't been born yet, their future depends on that. Our impacts on our water and our land and our air influence our economic health and wellness, our physical health and wellness, but most importantly, our spiritual wellness and how we're able to navigate through daily life, and then to be able to come to a place like this and have to fight and advocate for the wellness of all of your people. So we're just really grateful for this, and I know everyone back home in Akwesasne is grateful for this opportunity. Nyala.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Beverly Cook from St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. Now I'd like to invite Thora Padilla, the Natural Resources Director for the Mescalero Apache Tribe.
Good afternoon. I just want to echo what my partners here have said, and you know, consultation should not be an afterthought. It should be something we do up front. You know, how do you get input into doing these different projects? I mean, you talk to the tribes, you develop a relationship with them, and that's really important. There is no shortcut to that. You know, sitting down face to face, and like they said, not just nodding heads and so forth. Our tribe is really trying hard to develop economic ventures, opportunities, and it's really hard when you have a infrastructure that doesn't even support the people there. You know, we need assistance. We need more help to give safe drinking water to our people, to have roads to get to places. You know, tribes have been doing this, just piecing it together over the years with different pieces, and it's really hard. Things are not truly functional, and we really do need to get up to that point where we can have more business in all the tribal nations, not just Mescalero. Thank you very much.
I want to thank everybody who came to participate and to report on this very important GAO report. And I want to thank all the individuals who came and to show support and who spoke at today's press conference. That'll conclude this press conference. If you have questions, you can ask the individual members, anybody up here, any question that you like. Thank you.